Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Turn It Off and On Again. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most critical controls within the Essential 8 framework, and that is multi-factor authentication. So I'll show you today how to deploy MFA policies that are compliant with the different maturity levels, so maturity level 1, 2, and 3, and also talk about how you can use these policies to interact with other frameworks as well. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel when trying to use MFA across multiple different frameworks. So if you're serious about compliance, then today's going to be a must watch. So let's start off this conversation by having a look at what the framework actually asks for in terms of multi-factor authentication. So obviously we have maturity level 1, 2, and 3, and they differ slightly. Now, Essential 8 on a whole is not actually prescriptive in terms of what multi-factor authentication configuration is required. It is very much open to interpretation. And so you can have one policy, you could have 6 policies, all working together to achieve that goal. And it's the same for ones like NIST, for ISO, for SMB 1001. So all of these frameworks are very... there's no prescription in terms of how you need to configure MFA. Whereas for ones like CIS, it is prescriptive. So it does tell you how to configure it. So in terms of being able to achieve compliance, it's actually a lot easier than a lot of people think because you can actually configure it how you want to. So we'll dive in now and have a little look at some of the frameworks and actually how they do that wording in terms of how MFA needs to be configured to be compliant. So what we have here is the framework for the Essential 8. So this has been pulled from the cyber.gov.au website. And here what we're looking at is the maturity level 1 framework compliance. So as we can see here, it's fairly generic. So it's basically looking for authentication is used to authenticate users to their online service. Then it's used for third-party services. And its MFA is used where available to online services that process, store, or communicate non-sensitive data, and it's also looking to all of those different aspects, and it uses either something users have, so this is where the requirement comes in. So multi-factor authentication uses either something that users have and something that users know, or something the users have that is unlocked by something users know or are. So it's a very weird wording structure, and we'll have a look at a couple of different interpretations of this soon. But it's a very weird wording structure. Now, if we jump to maturity level 2, as you can see, there's more controls here. So we can see that MFA is used to authenticate. So some of the controls are the same, but then it says that MFA is used to authenticate privileged users of a system. So this is where you could have things like MFA for admin users, a specific type. Then you've got MFA is used to authenticate unprivileged users. And it's either something users have, something users know, etc. So a lot of that wording is the same. But this is where the big changes come in. And maturity level 2 and 3 are very similar from a particular control perspective in terms of what you actually need to create. But these particular controls are looking at MFA is phishing resistant. So successful and unsuccessful MFA events are centrally logged, etc. So that is all ticked off by being logged within the Microsoft 365 Center itself. But in terms of MFA being configured, etc., it's calling for phishing resistance here as part of M2, and M3 is the same. Now, Microsoft, what they have done, as we'll jump over here, we can see that they've actually outlined some good definitions. So this has been written by some Microsoft employees here in Australia, and they've actually given you some good definitions in terms of how to configure it within the 365 stack. So it's showing here what it is, what it's trying to do, and the permitted authentication types. Now, they all have to be a multi-factor authentication. So as long as it's like a password plus SMS or password plus voice, you've got then your normal Microsoft Authenticator app, you've got Windows Hello for Business, and FIDO security keys. So we can see that it's fairly broad in terms of what it does allow for. And you can see here Microsoft break it down into a nice table form. So it's normally password and or etc. But Microsoft, the ones that are not permitted is your SMS sign-in and email OTP. Now for maturity level 2, again, more things are not permitted. So SMS is not allowed, email's not, authenticator app, phone sign-in is not, password plus, etc. It has to be a phishing-resistant MFA. And what phishing-resistant MFA is things like, your hardware token, so your FIDO2 authenticator key, so these could be like a YubiKey, etc. They have to be a phishing-resistant form of authentication. Smart cards, it's where things get a lot more complicated and a lot trickier to actually authenticate. But Microsoft, again, has given some great little steps in terms of how to achieve it as well. And it gives a nice little graph here highlighting what is and what isn't allowed. Now, how does this intersect with other frameworks? So ones like SMB 1001 just say MFA is turned on for users. It's very nondescript in terms of what it's looking for. Others like NIST, which is a fairly broad and strong framework. So here we can see we've got the authentication assurance level, and it's broken down into 1, 2, and 3, similar to our Essential 8. But you can see that for maturity level 1, it's basically not even requiring MFA in that particular vein. But 2 and 3, again, similar types, similar requirements. So again, AAL2 is offering phishing-resistant options. So it's offered. So it's very similar to our maturity level 1. And then AAL3 is asking for the stricter form. So phishing resistance is required. So again, if you've complied with Essential 8, you've most likely complied with NIST, SMB, ISO, their type of requirements. So one framework where it's non-prescriptive is very easy to move laterally across your framework arrangement and actually find that you've covered off a number of different areas. All right, so how do we jump into configuring policies that are compliant with our frameworks? So what we want to do is jump into the Entra Admin Center and go to Conditional Access. If we jump into policies here, we can actually see that in this particular tenant, we actually already have two policies that are configured. Now, these are created by Microsoft. They're already in an on state, and you can see they were created back in April. So these particular policies are built by Microsoft, and they're there by default, ready for us to override with our own custom versions of these policies. So let's say we want to create a basic MFA policy, one that's compliant with maturity level 1. So let's say we go MFA M1. We make it nice and simple. So here we can come in, we can go, who do we want to cover? Well, I think we want all users covered by this. What resources do we want to target? So this is here where we can come in and actually select whether we want to target all resources or whether we want to select certain resources or even agent resources. So agent resources is currently in preview, and that is around Copilot agents. So that's if you've got any particular Copilot agents created. But let's say we want to select certain resources. So we can select a specific resource, and we might just want to cover 365 because we might use other policies to protect other aspects of our organization. So as this is the broad ranging policy, let's say we select Office 365. We can then come down into network. Is there anything specific in here we want to configure? No, not necessarily. You can use trusted locations and zones if you wish to. Microsoft is sort of moving away from those sort of recommendations to use trusted zones and trusted networks, etc., and authorized regions, because if you've got policies that lock down to Australia, I mean, a hacker can just use a VPN to make themselves look like they're in Australia and circumvent that protection. So not necessarily a great recommendation there in terms of using this. There's a lot of other better and stronger protections that can be used, and we'll go into some of those today. Conditions, we won't select any of these for this particular policy, but access controls we will. So we want to require MFA. But as we saw before within Microsoft, what we actually need to do is configure some authentication strengths. Because if we saw in that previous web page that there were some that were not allowed. So what we actually need to do is close out of this, and let's go back in time and create an authentication strength. So here we can see that there's a couple of built-in ones. They're not configured in any policy yet, but we want to make our own custom one. So what we can do is we can call this MFA M1 for maturity level 1. So what options are available to us? So we know that phishing-resistant MFA was available. We know passwordless MFA was available. And we know that MFA was available. But the options for single-factor authentication should never be allowed. And so they're not compliant. Now, in terms of allowing these, we can have multi-factor where you've got password plus an SMS, password plus voice. I would actually untick these particular ones because we don't really want to rely on SMS and we don't really want to rely on voice. For a proper, good, secure solution, we really want to push people towards utilizing a MFA method that is stronger and less easier to intercept, like SMS or voice, because they are both across an unencrypted connection. So in this instance, we would most want them to use a known, either a software auth. Ideally, the Authenticator app is one of the best ones that you can use for this to be compliant with this particular function. So we want to select this. We're happy with this. We go next. We click create, and we add this MFA M1 authentication strength. So now what we'll do is we now go and jump back into our policy. We go new policy. We pop in the same details that we were going to do. So we enter that same information. We select all users, resources. We will select 365 again. We then move down into our access control, and instead of going require MFA, we require authentication strength, and we select our MFA M1 there. Now, some people wonder why you don't select this one. Because this has the requirement of an MFA, there's no need to select this one. So Microsoft just grays it out as it's no longer required. We want to make sure that all of the controls are selected, and we hit select. And report policy, do we want it report only? That's a good mode if you're unsure what the impact of that policy is going to be. And that's a great mode to select if you don't want to lock yourself out of that tenant. But in this instance, we know that this is fine. I'm happy with this particular configuration. We select on and we hit create. So this will now create that policy, and we'll have now successfully created an MFA M1 policy. So now we want to move on to making our maturity level 2 policy. So what we can do here is we come in here, we click on new policy, and we'll go maturity level 2. Actually, do you know what we did forget? We need to do a new authentication strength, don't we? So if we come in here, new authentication strength, let's call this one MFA M2 and 3. Because for maturity level 2 and 3, the controls are actually the same within 365. There's no real difference from a configuration standpoint. And what do we know the control is? Phishing resistant. So we need to select this. So these are our only 3 options that are effectively phishing resistant. Unfortunately, the Authenticator app doesn't meet that requirement. It does allow for passwordless, but phishing resistant is a passkey, certificate-based, or Windows Hello for Business. So we hit next, we hit create, and now that policy is in place, but it's not configured in any policy yet. So we need to go and create that policy. So now what we're going to do is we jump over to policies, we go new policy, and we'll go MFA M2-3. So here we want to target all users. Again, target resources here. This is where we'll go select as well. We'll go Office 365. We hit select, grant, and we're going to go authentication strength M2-3. We hit select. Now, I'm not going to turn this policy on because I don't currently have a FIDO key associated with this tenant. So I'm just going to leave it in report only because I don't want to lock myself out of my tenant. So I'll hit create. And we have now created a successful maturity level 2 and 3 policy. So if we hit refresh, we will see that policy appear shortly. There we go. So you can see here that it's a user policy, report only. We can see the dates that are associated with it. And those controls are in place, which is good, but it is in report only. Now, what are some other policies that you might want to create in terms of conditional access? So let's say we wanted to create a policy that targeted admin users. So we might go MFA admin restrictions. So here we would select users and groups. No. We might want this to apply to a particular group. We might want it to apply to all users or selected users. And so here we would just go selected users and groups, but we might want it to apply to directory roles instead because we're targeting administrative users. So there is a lot of rules in here, but let's say we wanted this to specifically apply to any global administrators. So here we can target this directory role, but you can also do multiple selections here as well. So we can select multiple roles. But what I'm going to do is just target global administrator for the purposes of this. So anyone who's a global admin will have this policy apply to them. So again, here we can select our target resources, but for this, we might want to target everything because in here, in this list, you will see that there's a particular category for admin portals, and there's different categories of things that connect in. So if you're using Azure Virtual Desktop, if you're using, Dynamics, if you're using other aspects of Microsoft, you can actually restrict those particular applications to require this. But in this instance, because it is a GA account, I will actually want it to apply to all resources. So here we'll go networks fine, conditions are fine, grant. This is where we want to go grant access. And I am going to actually select require authentication strength, but I'm just going to blanketly select phishing-resistant MFA using that built-in role. But I'm also going to require the device to be marked as compliant. Now, why am I ticking this? Now, this is an important little tick box because the device being compliant means that there's a tie-in between the user who's logging into your tenant and the device that they're using being enrolled and compliant within Intune. So this means that for this particular global administrator, we are requiring that they have phishing-resistant MFA, but we're also requiring that the device that they're using is known and trusted so that it's not logging in from a device that we don't know. Now, this is important because if a GA account is compromised, let's say their YubiKey is stolen and they've got their credentials, but someone then tries to log in from their own device, it's an extra line of defense in terms of being able to get into that organization. So this is where device being marked as compliant is really important in helping to restrict and to protect your environment. So for a GA account in this particular organization, we want that in place. So if we hit select, we can now go, is there any session controls? Yes, this is where we want sign-in frequency. So we want a periodic re-authentication. I think probably every 4 hours is what we want. And persistent browser sessions, never persistent. So we don't want people to go, remember my credentials, hit yes and save that. We don't want that for a global administrator account. So we hit select on those. So this is where we're putting more and more and more conditions upon this account. Now you can see here Microsoft is screaming at me going, please don't create this. Now the account that I'm using here is for this example is obviously a GA in this tenant, and this is all fine. I am going to leave this account in report only. I'm not going to apply it to myself, but I am happy to proceed with this configuration, and I understand that my account will be impacted by this policy. Now, Microsoft put these in place because they want you to make sure that the device that you're using is compliant. They're wanting to make sure that you've already got all of these things ready, because as soon as we hit create, within about 10 minutes, this policy is now active. So Microsoft is trying to cover themselves and cover us so that we don't accidentally lock ourselves out of our accounts and then have a really bad time trying to call Microsoft to get back in again, because it's not going to be fun. It'll take you 2 weeks to get back in, is some of the stories I've heard over time. So it's not fun. Unless you've got a particular software that ties into Entra that gets you back in, there's no way you're logging a ticket to Microsoft and you'll be on the phone for a while. So we hit create. And now we can see that MFA Admin Restrictions Policy is now created. Now, what other policies can we have? So we've looked at like MFA Admin Restrictions. We've looked at MFA policies as a whole. There's so many different aspects and areas you can target with these conditional access. So another good one is actually setting up what we call user risk and sign-in risk policy. So these form part of Entra ID P2. And so we'll go into those a bit now and have a look at how they work. So I'm just going to create a nice, easy user risk policy. So I want all users pulled into this, and I want all resources targeted by this. And this is where we look at the conditions area. So we can see that user risk level. Configure this. So this requires obviously the Entra P2 license, but what this does is it looks at the user's sign in. So let's say that Joe Bloggs has logged in their office in Melbourne today, but then in the same time, 2 hours later, he's also logged in from their Seattle office. Now that is what we call impossible travel. There is no way he could have possibly got from these two locations. And if Microsoft sees that both accounts are still active at the time, that is considered a user risk that is high and a problem. So that is a likelihood that the user account is compromised. And so what Microsoft here can do is if they've identified a medium risk or a high risk, you wouldn't necessarily pick the low risk, but certain organizations may want to. But effectively here, we're going to select the high and medium risk and we hit done. And now this is where we actually have some options. So we can either grant access or we can block access. Now, it's very much up to your interpretation of how you want this policy to apply within your organization. So in terms of, myself, what you might want to do if, let's say, the MFA token has been phished and they've got that token, you could require MFA authentication again, and that will then require the regeneration of that token, which would then render the nefarious actor's token invalid and you can't use it. The other thought process is to actually block access. And this means that there's been impossible travel. We just drop the hammer. We block them. We stop them getting access. And then we look at it means that they're going to have to log a ticket with support. They're going to lose access. But in this situation, it might be better to, buy yourself some time to actually dive through the logs, see what happens, and you become aware of the impossible travel that's happened, rather than, them granting access, requiring MFA, and away they go again. Because you don't know whether the nefarious actor has access to the phone, you don't know whether they have somehow compromised any other aspect of that machine, and so they'll just keep getting the new token each time. So this is where, in my personal opinion, I think block access is a better approach for this particular type of policy, and actually drop the hammer down and go, nope, we need to do a proper investigation for this. And so in this instance, we would go block, we hit select, and then here again, you would turn it on or off, but it's a nice, simple, easy policy. And it's effectively the same for sign-in risk if you wanted to select that as a condition. So you have here the sign-in risk as well that you can use that. We've also got insider risk, which is related to Purview insider risk management. So if you have that particular license in place that looks at the work that a user's doing within the particular instance and doing dodgy stuff within the organization with the data that they have. So that's another great little option that you've got there as well. So here again, I'm going to understand, but I'll just create it as report only. And so now we have a user risk policy created. Now, we're still not done. There's still so many other policies that we can actually create within this conditional access platform. Another one we're going to look at is, let's say we want to do MAM. Now, some of you may or may not have heard of it before, but a MAM policy effectively means that you can actually control the mobile applications or the devices that connect into your organization. And this is then coupled with an Intune policy to allow for iOS and Android devices to access the Outlook app, Teams app, Office apps, etc., not necessarily needing to have to enroll the phone into the organization, because Some people can get a bit prickly about that. But effectively what it means is that you can enroll the application into your environment rather than the phone itself. So it means that the content in the authorized applications are there in place, but the users aren't having to enroll their whole phone in the organization. All right, so what we do is we go to configuration here. Again, select all users. Target resources for phones. Most likely you would go select and specific, like an Office 365. Here we want to dive into conditions. So we want to go to device platforms. What devices are we wanting to support? So we want to configure this and we want to select that this applies to iOS and Android devices. We then hit done on that. And then what we want to do is come down to grant. And here what we're going to do is actually select require an app protection policy. So this is a app protection policy is configured within Intune. So we'll jump in there shortly and show you how this works. But we then just hit select. And so for any iOS or Android device that's connecting into this environment, they will have this particular policy apply to them. And so now what we want to do is we'll leave it as report only for the moment, but proceed with the selected exclude device platforms. No, we want to proceed. May receive prompts when the device is checked for compliance. Well, they shouldn't because we didn't select it. So let's just double check that. Conditions, device platforms. Yep, it's definitely just Android and iOS. So that's a funny message from Microsoft there. We'll go create. So that policy has now been created. All right, so we've jumped into Intune now. So what we're going to do is jump down here into tenant admin. We're going to go to connectors and tokens. And we're going to go down to mobile threat defense. We're going to click on create and we want to set up here Windows Security Center. So this is important in terms of being able to make sure that the unmanaged devices, it's checking to make sure that they are actually correctly configured. So we hit create. And so now that is just going to run through and set itself up. So it'll automatically provision and sync itself up. So we'll be able to see it in the sec. Actually, it needs to wait until the first user has enrolled, actually. So that will take a little bit of time. But what we'll now do is jump into setting up our app protection policies. So if we jump into endpoint security and we want to go to, no, sorry, it is under apps. If we want to go in here, we want to go to protection. We can click on create. Now we can select different application platforms. So if we go to iOS, let's say we want to call this for, what's a good application? Like Teams. We can say, well, Office protection. We can actually cover off a number of different applications here. So we've selected the platform is iOS/iPadOS. We hit next and we have our selected apps. So we're going to select all Microsoft apps. So Microsoft makes it nice and easy. And this is where we want to actually make sure that everyone only uses the targeted application that we're wanting to use. So we're going to go all Microsoft apps. Correct. Now this is where you've got a number of different options that you can choose. So backup organization data to iTunes and cloud backups. No, we don't really want that. Send organization to other apps. Only policy managed apps, I would suspect. And there are certain apps you can exempt, etc. Save copies of org data. No, blocking that. Transfer telecommunication data to an any dialer app. Yep, that should be fine. Messaging data. No. Do not transfer this data between apps. Receive data from other apps. Yes, that's fine. We can always send out other information. Restrict cut, copy, and paste between other policy matched apps with paste in. Policy managed apps, any app. So that's a good option to select. And you can also have character limits. So there's so much you can have in place in terms of configuring it. Encrypting any organization data. Again, you can just select whether you want it encrypted or not, etc. Genmojis, etc. We just hit next. Then you've got access requirements. Do you want Face ID? Do you want pins? I'm just going to leave these all as the default. But these are all options that you have available to you to select from. Conditional launch. These are what Microsoft deems as sort of a best practice. Again, you can make your own choices on that. Any jailbroken or rooted devices automatically should be blocked in terms of access. We can hit next. And here you can pick a group. So you might have a group here that you might have a pilot group or an app protection group, users who are allowed to have access, or you might just select, it should be all users, shouldn't it? So we'll select all users here. And so you could have a specific pilot group, or you just have it a blanket category targeting everyone. So we hit that, we go next, we hit create. And now that policy has been created. And for Android, it is effectively the same sort of process. So again, what apps do you want to target? All Microsoft apps. Next. Same sort of controls are all in place. Next. Next. Assignments, add groups, all users. We hit create. And that policy is now in place. So this is how you can tie Intune with conditional access as well to form a MAM policy, or mobile application manager policy. So I hope that is helpful. Now, this is a whole heap of policies. None of them are necessarily explicitly called out within the framework, but this is all helpful policies that you can have in place. So there you have it. That's how you configure multi-factor authentication to be compliant with Essential 8 maturity level 1, 2, and 3, but also how these policies can intersect across multiple different frameworks. And that's the important one to remember, that even though you might be chasing Essential 8 compliance, you might have another client who is wanting to chase NIST, or you might have another client who's wanting SMB. You can reuse the same policies across multiple clients. And this makes life easier for you guys to be able to help manage your customers or clients or your internal IT. No matter what you're looking at, these policies are all interchangeable. And in terms of being achieving the letter of the law of these policies, it's always important to remember that no matter what they explicitly call out, what you can configure is always more. And it's always better to do more, because the more security that you can have in place to protect your users, protect the identity, it is the first line of defense into your organization. So the more policies you can have in place to protect your devices, the users, the mobile applications that you're using, it's always a better thing. The frameworks are always there as a guideline. They're there to at least help you achieve a minimum level of security, but you can always go above and beyond. And so that is my recommendation. Create more policies, secure more of your landscape. Thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you very much. Bye.